And we are back live on Cultureveille. I am very happy to be here in the center of the Congress, the Palace of Congress in Barcelona, which is currently hosting the Sonar+D Congress. Sonar+D is an international congress that focuses on creativity, technology, and business. And if we're here, it's also as a joint partnership with the French Ministry of Culture, which is signing its first international collaboration around the Forum Entreprendre dans la culture, which is the Forum for Cultural Entrepreneurship. I am welcoming with me on the set two people from BBC R&D. First, Tim Cowlishaw. Hi, Tim. You're a technologist. That's how you define yourself. And Jakub Fiala, you're creative technologist. Yes. Thank you very much for being with us. You are just out of a workshop about keeping creativity in broadcast R&D, and you will soon have to run to your next workshop on how to hack Google Homes and Alexa and this type of devices. So, my question to you both, Jakub and Tim, is what are the latest trends that are affecting the way customers consume and interact with TV and radio content? What are you witnessing right now, and what are the trends that are coming in the coming few years?
So I think one of the ones that affects us as BBC R&D specifically would be machine learning, for instance. There's a lot of work that's been done around this at R&D, and it's certainly of large interest to us and the wider organisation at the BBC, mainly because that seems to these days be kind of quite talked about in the media quite a lot, and there's a lot of press coverage, but also I think people are getting used to interacting with personalized content. It's consuming content is stopping to be a linear process. It's not prescribed, but there's a lot of automated process in the background, and so the way we consume media now is, I think, changing rapidly based on this.
And when you talk about machine learning, are you referring to recommendation algorithms, for instance, or is it something else?
So partially, I think recommendations and ways of doing personalization are a big part of this, because this is the kind of use case for a lot of this stuff, I think, as we're producing not just, you could think of it as not just doing 4 TV channels, but one for every single person who's watching potentially, and obviously you don't have enough. So recommendations is the kind of use case. But the interesting thing about that problem is there's a bunch of other stuff that goes into that as well. So if you imagine you're producing multiple different TV channels, we don't have enough people to do the work around all of those. So there's lots of questions around how you help people with the production of these things. You help build tools so that people can kind of work effectively across all these different sort of streams of things. So we've done one of the interesting things around that is how we use our archive, for instance. So we've got hours and hours and hours of radio and TV which kind of are available and they're not very easily discoverable. And once you start getting into personalizing things, you might find, one thing from way back in the 1950s that's very, very prescient for 1 or 2 people now. And using machines to discover this type of thing is also very important, because it's just too much to watch on your own and annotate. So a lot of our work goes into sort of understanding the programs we've produced in the past in order to kind of resurface them. But it all does come from that kind of use case of recommendation and personalization, but it leads on to lots of other things.
Okay, so you probably have a lot of issues or questions around how to treat data, because I imagine you have massive amounts of data that you need to qualify in order to be able to then push it towards the right type of people, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, and since you work at the BBC, which is a traditional TV channel, what is the impact for the BBC, and what is the impact, generally speaking, for traditional TV channels and traditional radio channels as well, that are more linear, as you put it in the beginning?
So I think it's important to say that we're actually, we're not necessarily qualified to speak for the whole organisation. The BBC is a huge place, you know. And but I guess for us the significance is, and the impact on us as the R&D part of the BBC is that we're always looking kind of 5 to 10 years ahead in whatever we do, and so it looks like these personalization trends are going to be extremely relevant. They're extremely relevant now, but they're going to be even more relevant in 5 years. So it's almost like the clock's ticking in a way, and for us as R&D, it's important to pick that up quite early on.
There's an interesting thing to add there, I think, as well, because being a traditional broadcaster, we've got a lot of sort of institutional skills and knowledge that kind of people like tech firms don't necessarily have. So one of the interesting things, if you compare us to someone like one of our kind of commercial competitors, one of these sort of new streaming platforms, is we have two things. One, we have this archive of stuff we have produced over history, which doesn't necessarily exist elsewhere. But we've also got very specific expertise and a very specific way of looking at things. And if you start looking at, like that question of recommendations is an interesting one. So the way recommendations normally works is there is a list of things with the thing that's judged most likely to be interesting for you at the top, then the second most likely second, and the third most likely third, and then gradually dropping off. Whereas if you talk to someone who, for instance, schedules a radio program, they wouldn't approach it like that. They'd go, right, I need to make sure I have kind of diversity in things. There's all these skills around how you put together a radio station or a TV channel, which can be applied in that kind of personalized context. But it's kind of taking all the editorial knowledge and applying it to this new technology, which I think we're in a really good position to do.
I think the other thing to add to that is also being a public organization. There is a sense of duty to have diversity as our value, you know. So we can't disregard that element, which sometimes makes things more difficult in machine learning, for instance. But I think it's worth focusing on. That's
true. So we've got a very different set of incentives to a commercial organisation. We've got a very different kind of remit, and that means we can do work that might, you know, other people might not consider. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of take that unique position we have and turn that into really unique things.
Right. And let's try to protect ourselves 10 years into the future. If I switch on my TV, what's going to be different? Or will I even switch on my TV? Or will I just, I don't know, look at my iPad or my computer?
That's an interesting question. So we did a lot of work around exactly this, future TV experiences. And the thing we were asked the exact same question to start with. So is there any point doing things for a screen on the wall in a living room? And we did a bunch of research on this, and we kind of approached it from the point of view that there will still be communal watching. So the assumption, if everyone's looking on their iPad, is everyone is looking at things together. And then we kind of took this view that TV watching is a social activity to some extent. So whether or not it's a screen on a wall or a projector, there will still be some kind of sitting around and watching things together. So based on that, I don't know if you were switching on a television or not, but I suspect some things will happen as there'll be a lot more interesting work around how people make choices in groups. So rather than just having a single control that one person is in charge of, there might be kind of interfaces that accommodate multiple people that are aware of who's watching. And this goes back to the personalization stuff as well. No one's really worked on what it means to personalize something for three people sitting together. So I would expect something that is aware of your context, aware of who you're with, aware of your routines. And physically, I'm not sure what that will look like, but I'm pretty sure there'll still be something in your living room at home that you and your family perhaps can do together that involves something like television.
So you're mentioning it's a social activity, which brings me to social networks, for instance. Now you get more, I mean, not you specifically, but now we get more feedback as well from our customers. So what type of feedback do you expect? What type of feedback loop maybe do you expect in the future? How are you going to introduce that into the way you're doing TV? Or Is it something that you are working on? I don't want you to disclose anything.
So actually, that's kind of the agency question in a way.
Yeah, this is the agency question.
So one thing that we've explored as part of our kind of personalization work was around, giving users the ability to immediately impact what their personalization looks like, and it's interesting. I mean, I don't think we have time to go into great detail, but essentially we found that that there are a lot of very specific subtleties in how people want their personalization to work, and they do want to give feedback, but there are kinds of feedback they don't really want to give, and there are other kinds of feedback that and it's all about accelerating it, but also doing it in a way that gives people the tools that they need to be in control.
The important thing there, though, is that we're thinking a lot about explicitly asking people. So there's a lot of... So if you look at the kind of sort of behavioral measurement that things like Facebook does, where it kind of tries to infer things about you, we've... and again, we don't speak for the whole organization. This is a research project. We've kind of investigated going from the other direction and going, what happens if I want to know something about your taste in a program? We just ask you, or we let you tell us. And I think there's quite a profound thing here, because people's tastes are very subjective. Only you get to decide whether you like something or not. So trying to kind of preempt that based on kind of observing things about you that you don't know yourself seems to be kind of missing the point to me. So we've done a lot of work on explicit feedback. Okay. The reason I think this might be a trend is one of the things we've noticed in some of our prototyping work is we've been, with a couple of experiments, we were quite deliberately provocative about the use of sensors and things like this. So things like cameras, things like far-field microphones, Alexa-type microphones. Right. And in general, the people we've tested with are very, very privacy conscious, very, very resistant to this stuff. And I think there's possibly a trend at work that is a sort of backlash against this type of thing. So we're trying to prepare for that by looking at how we can kind of consensually work with people to deliver personalized services rather than being intrusive. Yes.
Okay. I have a very last question for you. If you would have to mention one crazy trend that you've come upon that is interesting and that you want to look into, which one would that be? Do you have one in mind? Something a bit crazy, but you think, oh, well, that's worth exploring.
Oh, I've got one. It's not really a technology one. I was asked this question a little while back and I was being a bit belligerent and choosing one that wasn't technology, but I'm really fascinated about what happens when... Right, for a bit of context, I used to teach a programming class in a primary school, so to 7-year-olds, and all these kids, they're going to be adults in 15, 20 years. They're probably not all going to be computer programmers, but they're going to go out in the world with the knowledge and the skills to make computers do what they want, and I'm desperate to know what happens when we've got a whole cohort of adults for whom computers are things that are kind of refashionable and can be made to kind of bend to their will, and I think that's going to be... I don't know what that'll mean for technology, but I think it'll be very, very different to the way we kind of approach things like the web now. Will be very, very different.
Yeah, programming is going to be their native language.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Let's see what they do with that.
Yeah, and there won't mean armies of people doing it professionally, but it will mean people doing some very interesting things in their spare time, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Jakub, something you want to mention?
Well, I was just thinking about the content itself, how it's changing, and how YouTube videos for me, the YouTuber culture in general, that's going to be very interesting for us, in 10 years onwards, because the way they edit video, the way they produce content is very different. It's much faster. There's a lot more going on. I feel like I'm already kind of too old to understand it, so I'm just wondering what that's going to look like. But
all right. We'll see. Well, thank you very much for your answers, and thank you for having been here and answering our questions. We're going to keep an eye out for what's going to happen, and I know you have somewhere to run to, so I'm not keeping you any longer. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.